Greetings, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I believe we are going. Yes, okay. Um, so I'm Amy Antonucci. I am a New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund board member, and I'm really glad to welcome you to our Peace and Justice Conversation series online. This is on Monday, September 22nd, 2025, the day after the International Day of Peace. So part of what we are doing today is in honor of that. And the topic is how to have difficult conversations. I'd like to start, though, with an acknowledgement that we are doing our work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the people who have been in relationship for so many generations. Quick reminder on Zoom guidelines. We love it when you have your video on, although it's fine if you don't. And we will keep your audio muted for now. You can use the chat to ask questions all along, and later we'll do hand raising. And I'll get to those chat questions when we get to the Q&A. And today, as is kind of our usual, we'll have our speaker talk for a while and then move into Q&A. So again, if you want to put questions in the chat or keep them until that Q&A time, go for it. And we will do, we'll call on people then too. So let me introduce to you our speaker. We're really pleased to have Kevin Blanchette here with us. He is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and adjunct professor at New England College and trainer. He specializes in working with people who are struggling with trauma and psychosis, and also in helping people improve their interpersonal skills. I met Kevin about a year and a half ago at a nonviolence training. And since then, we have been in some programs, and he has even been helping out at New Hampshire Peace Action. So this is one way he's doing that, and we are thrilled. So please join me in a visible welcome of Kevin.
Thank you. I appreciate you all having me, and I appreciate you all showing up for this talk today. This is something I find so interesting, and I love being able to think more deeply about it. So I appreciate the opportunity to think through this a little bit more, pitch it in a little bit of a different way today. Some of you may have been at this very similar presentation training I did back in June at the annual meeting. And there's some things I went over then that I'll be going over today, and there's some different things as well. I did adjust it slightly based on format, time, things like that, and just to have something new because I knew some people are going to hear it twice. This talk, as I was creating the one back in June, during this Monday night series, there was a speaker, Katsu Haga, who had an amazing talk. I highly recommend. It goes over a lot of similar things I'm going to be going over today, but he does it from a different perspective in a slightly different way. I'm going to add the link to that YouTube video in the chat. I highly recommend you all watch that as well. He also has some really great books. Myself and Amy are reading one of them right now. He has such a great perspective to put on to this work. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And as I go through this today, I want you all just thinking about somebody that you are having difficult conversations with or would like to have a difficult conversation with, but not sure how. And have that person in mind to be thinking about what you could actively be doing to put yourself in better position for this. I do want to note that we can make our these conversations more of a chance of being successful, but we can never change the other person or force the other person to act in any certain ways. Some things I'm going to go over today are more about what we can do to help influence these conversations in more positive ways, um, in ways that I found to be more helpful. This mostly started in my work with people with psychosis, but I quickly learned that people without psychosis in my life were also presenting me with some of the similar challenges, and I was using a lot of the same skills and finding them very helpful. Today, we're going to start off with explaining some of the behavior that we commonly see in conflict. Go over a little meditation exercise for ourselves that I find can be really helpful for us to do. And then I'll go over some strategies I mentioned. That this is to help relieve some of the mental strain that we have to put into conversations. It takes a lot of thought of how we want to address these certain circumstances. And so go over some strategies that can help ease some of that and make it a little bit easier for our minds. So I want to first start with some common behaviors we see. And a main one is when we're in a conflict with another person, they tend to focus on their point instead of considering ours. And we can feel we're sharing certain things to them and they're not listening to us. They just keep coming back with their point, maybe in a different perspective. They're saying it in a slightly different way. Sometimes they're not even saying it in a different way, they're saying it in the exact same way. And that's a very common thing that can happen because people, when they're in a conflict and like can be seen as the debate, their goal is to prove their point. So their focus is on that. And that's the mental perspective they're taking in the conversation is what is their point and what do they need to say? They're going to be hearing our words so they know how to refute them and come back at us, but they're not going to really be listening to our message. Uh, and that can be pretty frustrating and hard to work through and work around. One of the things that feeds into this is confirmation bias. People are very focused on what proves their point, and they will weight that evidence very heavily, where other evidence, they will either not weight it as that important, or sometimes they just don't even recognize it as evidence at all. They don't tend to see it, and that's where we get into this other thing called inattentional blindness. This is when our brains don't see evidence. Like there's a certain what seems to be obvious evidence right in front of a person, and they don't see it somehow. And so that blindness, I really like that that's in this phrase because it helps us to recognize this isn't just ignoring. This is they really don't see it. They have no acknowledgement and no recognition of this evidence is right there, even though we had just told them that. And we're sharing it, and it's because of their attention. Their attention is focused in other directions and other areas, so they're not recognizing it's there. We need to get their attention back into the right spot, uh, which we'll go over how we can do that. But it's important for us to be aware that their attention is likely going to be elsewhere. They're likely going to be looking for what confirms their points and really focusing in on that. And that is mostly because in our society, there's a huge focus on winning. We see this very commonly with right now. It's Donald Trump has been very loud about his winning. Yeah, I've actually saw a book. I haven't read it myself, but it's about winning and Donald Trump's uh, use of winning. How often he says that word in his posts. How often he uses that perspective. And I don't think this is anything new to him. He is just recognizing how important winning is to our society and he's acknowledging that importance as well. This happens in individualistic societies because there's this us versus them, and in a conflict, when it comes to winning, for them to win means we need to lose. I said that is going to be their focus, is that we're wrong, we're going to lose, they're going to win. In more communal societies, there tends to be more of a focus of we win by working together, and coming to common goals, common endpoints. But in our society, it is more on the individual winning. That's not necessarily a bad thing in some areas of our lives when we are in work and really pushing ourselves to improve our knowledge, our skill levels. We can sometimes work with other people to help us out with that, but we can also, in some areas, we have personal goals. We're looking to win personally, and that's healthy, that's important. When it comes to conflict, though, communal importance of winning is more important than an individualistic importance on winning. Uh, so we are noticing these common behaviors, and they can seem like accidents, some mistakes, but our brains tend to not really make mistakes. They do things for a very important reason, important purpose. Two really important reasons for this, why our brains are doing these strategies or using them in these unusual ways. One is efficiency. When we think about our brains, they have to regulate our body temperature, our heart rate, our breathing, our space, like where we are in space relative to other objects, people. There's a lot our brains are doing every given second. Then on top of that, there's thinking about what we have to do later on today. There's thinking about our relationships and any issues that may be coming up. Thinking about what we want to have for dinner tonight. There's a lot of other things our brains are doing. When our brains can take a shortcut, they often will. And that's important for using our brain power efficiently, getting through things. But sometimes these shortcuts can lead to these challenges that we're seeing in our relationships. Oftentimes, when shortcuts aren't working out, that's when we recognize we need to take the long road. We can't just take a shortcut here. But sometimes we don't acknowledge that and we just push harder down that shortcut and fight harder into our perspective and keeping that where we are at. And that's because of a social need of acceptance. This sounds like something that's unusual when talking about negative social behaviors. We're generally not, they don't appear to be happening for acceptance. But usually that's exactly what they're happening for. Sometimes it is, they want to be accepted by us and they're trying to prove their value, either their intelligence and they're right in this argument, or maybe advocating for themselves. Some difficult conversations people have are if somebody is sick and they don't want to go to the hospital to get the care that they need. There's looking to be accepted and that they're valuable, they can advocate for themselves and make their own decisions. And it's not necessarily about being right, but a different important social need they need accepted. Some oftentimes people are looking for acceptance from us, but sometimes they're also don't care about it, whether or not we accept them. They're looking for somebody else to accept them. If you've ever been to a protest or anything like that and seen somebody with videotaping, automatically that means they're gonna be conflictual and they're looking to be accepted by others who are not there, that they're going to see this video and see how they're behaving, and that's who they're looking to be accepted by, not us. That's generally, if somebody has a camera out, that's a good sign that this conversation's probably not going to go anywhere. They're probably not going to be listened to. We want to be using different tactics to just protect ourselves and keep peace in an area. As we think about these different behaviors people are doing, why they're doing these things, it's important to also recognize and acknowledge that we are human, so we do these same things too sometimes. Uh, we're not necessarily going to be doing this intentionally. Sometimes we might, but we are often going to be doing these to different degrees as well. It's not that very few people use any of these strategies 100% of the time in full force. Sometimes we'll use them subtly or just in one little area in a conflict. So we want to be aware of what are we doing? How are we possibly using any of these behaviors? If our mental shortcuts are not really working out and it is time to go and take the long road instead of that mental shortcut. So that self-awareness is going to be really important. And that's one of the biggest reasons it's for us to understand these behaviors so that we can more easily see it in ourselves and have that self-awareness there. I was reading a book recently and asked a really great question of what responsibility do we have for the injustice in the world? Where is our money going? Where are we shopping? What are we shopping for? How is that influencing any injustices that might be in the world? How are we speaking online, in person with people? How is that influencing injustices in the world? Or what are we not doing? What are we not saying? Where are we not speaking up? And how might that influence this all? It's important to also have that self-awareness of what responsibility do we have towards things in the world. And if we do find there's any areas that we are not living up to our values, then it's time for us to find some way of reconciliation. There's an indigenous practice called Ho'oponopono, and it's this very beautiful meditation for reconciliation. It can be done in one of two ways. Some people will do these four mantras and just say them over and over and over again. For other people, they'll go through each mantra individually and expand upon it. I am sorry for my violent speech towards people who don't agree with me, and for letting my anger get to me and choose my words for me instead of myself getting to choose those words that I am speaking. Please forgive me for not having better restraint on my tongue, for not thinking more clearly about the messages that I portray to others and how I portray those messages. Thank you for continuing to be talking with me. Thank you for giving me the opportunities to correct these actions, to move forward with reconciliation. I love you for being fellow beings here with me, sharing this space for me, with me, and knowing that you have your own traumas, your own wounds that need to be healed as well. Doing a meditation like this can be very important for a few reasons. It's important that it helps us build that self-awareness of where our role in this world, what we may be doing improperly, where we might want to make some changes, taking responsibility for that. And it also helps us recognize what we are not responsible for and drawing a clear line there. So we're not taking on this inappropriate responsibility and apologizing for something that is not ours to apologize for, and giving that space for ourselves. We can be accountable and we can leave space for others to be accountable as well. This also helps to reduce the anger and fear in our own hearts as we are opening up hearts of reconciliation, of love. We are feeling love energy, and that's a very healing energy that we want to bring up in ourselves as we have difficult conversations. This is very important for us to hold on to. I assume all of you have here for a reason tonight, and you're looking for changes that you can make for yourself. And this is one of the biggest changes we can make for ourselves. When we heal our wounds, when we heal our fear, our frustration, only then can we help others heal themselves, heal their wounds, their anger, and their frustration as well. So it starts with us before we move on to them as well. But at some point, we do need to move on to them as well. And there's different ways we can do that. But something that I have found to be really helpful is getting onto their team. That does not mean we abandon our post and we completely throw away our values and our beliefs and just fall onto theirs. We need to be creative in how we do this, where we respect ourselves and our beliefs, but we see where we have common ground with that other person, and we try to meet them there. Again, we can't force them to be on our team, to meet us in that common ground. All we can do is influence that. And that comes from compassionate living, compassionate listening, and loving speech. We need to listen to them, and from a perspective of healing. We want to help them heal. We want to listen non-judgmentally as best as we can. We want to give them space as best as we can. Uh, Sometimes we're not going to be able to do that well, and we need to recognize that for ourselves and be honest with ourselves and with them of, I need some space away from this conversation right now. I do want to finish this conversation. I want to come back to it, but I need this space for myself, and going off, doing deep breathing, thinking through what was coming up for us, why it was becoming so difficult to continue in that conversation, and resolving our wounds, maybe going back to that Ho'oponopono and finding that reconciliation. But if we can't listen compassionately, then it is better for us to take that space and to end the conversation there until we can listen compassionately to the other person. That does not mean they are right. It just means they're another person who deserves our compassion. That's one important pillar to hold up difficult conversations, but that mostly just provides space for them. We need space for ourselves as well, because conversations are about relationship, and there are two sides to that. We need space for everybody, not just one person. And a big way we give space to ourselves is loving speech. We need to be kind with others and how we're speaking to them, but we also need to speak up. We need to be able to say our piece. Sometimes that's not going to be in that first conversation. Sometimes we'll need to just listen at first, and maybe it's one or a couple conversations of listening before it is right for us to go in and speak. But it's important that we take that space as well, and that we speak and we share ourselves with them. That is not being respectful if we stay silent. It is not honoring that other person, that they can handle us speaking and us sharing our view. It is not respectful because it is not being honest with that other person. And they not only deserve our compassion, but they deserve our honesty, and they deserve our respect. So we do want to speak up and share our point of view. We want to try to say it from a perspective where maybe they can hear, and that usually is going to go better after we listened to them and they saw that we are willing to respect them. They're going to be more willing to respect us. The easiest place to find common ground is going to be around emotions. Understanding what emotion are they feeling and why are they feeling that emotion in this instance, in this situation, what's coming up for them. Because we've all felt sad before. We have all felt angry. We have all felt fearful. We understand what it's like to feel those emotions. While we might not be able to agree on the specifics and the details with them, we can agree with how they're feeling. I don't know many people in this world right now who are not feeling exhausted, angry, scared with everything that we're seeing happening around us. We can all understand that, but we can very easily see people who have gone in different directions, different perspectives with those emotions. So we come back to that common ground in the middle. Meeting at emotions usually is going to be the best way to do that. And we can share our own emotions. This also makes me so angry, seeing what's going on around us. And this is why I found it so important for me to do this, to show kindness, this to speak out against it, and this for my neighbors, and we're able to speak our truth compassionately after they have spoken their truth, and we listened compassionately. Doing that is going to be really important. As we do these things, sometimes they can be a challenge, very challenging, because what the other person is saying is so frustrating to us. As I mentioned before, our brains like to be efficient. They like to take shortcuts, and there are some shortcuts that can help us out in these situations. We call them philosophical razors, and there are three that I have found to be very helpful for me. And mostly this has been in my work outside of therapy and not working with psychosis, but working with the people in my lives that I've been having difficult conversations with. This first one has been the most important one. Hanlon's razors never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And when we're being compassionate, I like to change that word stupidity to by being misinformed, by being wounded, looking at these different perspectives from it. But we can often see these people and think they are out to get us. They're attacking, they're aggressive, they're angry, they're bad, their intentions are bad. But oftentimes they have more innocent intentions. Sometimes we will have proof that it is actual malice. In that case, it's not more adequately explained by stupidity. It's very adequately explained by malice. But when we don't have that evidence, and it's important for us to challenge ourselves to see if we actually have the evidence for malice. When we don't have that evidence, it's more helpful and it's usually more accurate when we have this different perspective, a little bit more of an innocent perspective on it. Another philosophical razor is Occam's razor. And this is that when we are faced with multiple explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation is usually the best one. We can look at this world and see how complex it is, and it is complex in many ways, but we can ignore the fact of how simple the world can be as well, and how simple situations can be as well. Often, why I find this to be helpful in difficult conversations is because often, especially when we get stuck in the details and we weren't just focusing in on the emotions, things start to get really complex to prove those details. And we have to start going deeper and deeper and all these different unusual explanations. And it's much easier for us to just come back to, okay, well, what's simple? If we're really find that we've been stuck in trying to prove them wrong and trying to prove our point, just coming to what's simple and leaving it at that. And then the final razor I wanted to go over today is Hitchens' razor. As what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. Oftentimes in difficult conversations, people in order to prove their point will just assert something, but they won't provide any evidence to it. They'll just say, and this is just how it is. And we don't need to accept that. We don't need to challenge that or fight that. We can just say, okay, well, I just don't see it that way. And then we move back to where we have common ground. Because oftentimes, as we're trying to find common ground, they are not thinking through this conversation the same way you are. And they're going to still try to have this argument where they can win it. And we don't have to fall into that. We don't need to keep proving things. We can dismiss things that they don't bring with evidence for. And we can just move forward to our goal, which is building that relationship, building connection here. This puts a lot of work onto us and seemingly not a lot of work onto them. And I mentioned at the beginning, this is to make things easier for us and less mental work for us than it is for them. I want you to consider how much mental work you have been putting into trying to win these arguments that are not being won, that are not getting anywhere, and just spinning your wheels. This is a way where you are not, when we change our perspective of what we're working towards, instead of being winning, working towards relationship and connection and understanding, and most importantly, compassion. That is something we can have much more success with because that's about us and what we can do instead of about the other person. That doesn't require us to change the other person. It only requires us to change us, and we can change ourselves when we cannot change the other person. And this also makes things a little bit more efficient for our brains, a little bit easier and less mental work going into it, because a lot of this mental work of compassion and peace and love is healing to us. So as we're having these conversations, it can get frustrating as they may blame us, say inappropriate things to us. And if we need to, we can take that space and we can take breaths for ourselves. We can take care of ourselves. And then as we don't need to, we are taking breaths for ourselves as we're having these conversations. We are shining love from our hearts, and that's a healing energy. So it fills us up. It doesn't just take from us when we're having these difficult conversations. And all change has to start from us. We are a part of society. We can see people having these difficult behaviors. We can see groups of people having these difficult behaviors. And we can look around at the news and just feel overwhelmed by everything going on around us. But it's important that we recognize we are a part of this society. So our actions impact it automatically. There's nothing we can do to not have our words and actions and have an impact on society. So as we are intentional about that, as we're intentional about what is our impact in society, how are we showing up for people? How are we using this space? That can make a really big difference for us personally and for others around us. So we open our hearts, we heal ourselves first, and then we can leave that space and to help others heal themselves, and the others make the change for themselves instead of us changing others. I'm going to stop sharing now and just can open us to questions.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I am going to jump into questions. Please use, I'm going to say a little bit, but please use the hand raise function, especially. That's really helpful. Or again, go ahead and put things into the chat. I did want to mention, first of all, that today's event is part of the campaign Nonviolence that Pache Bene is leading, and I will give you some, I'll find and put a link to that. It's like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks of events all around the country. And so we're a part of that, just so you know. The other thing I wanted to say is that, New Hampshire Peace Action, we have a lot of focus on foreign policy. And in case you're wondering, well, this isn't foreign policy. The other thing, though, is that in order to deal with that, we talk with each other, right? We talk with people who agree with us and people who don't. And at the moment, the possibilities for anger and division and violence around us are really very real too. So we think it's a good time to be looking at this. We also notice in the New Hampshire Peacekeeping Project how much tension there is on the ground. So we feel like helping you up your skills a little bit and have us talk about this is really good. And again, I'm really grateful Kevin is here to do that with us. And I'm going to unmute George. How'd that go, George? It should have let you unmute now.
Okay. Thank you. Um, I'm wondering, and this is really good. I got a lot of good points, but I'm wondering how you approach someone whose intention is to be very hostile. I'm in the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, and when we have actions, people show up who are Proud Boys or what else the other there's white supremacist groups, and no white supremacist group member is going to approach me and have an open, loving, compassionate conversation. They start out hostile,
Mm.
and then it's hard for me not to be hostile back, especially knowing this person is a white supremacist. So, what is good advice for handling that without being violent? I'm never violent, but
Mm.
it does feel like I'm about to be.
Yeah, and for very valid reasons, and you should, and that's what they're looking for too. It's important to recognize and acknowledge, as you said, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking to have a conversation with you. Conversation in those situations, conversations can't happen, and we have to be able to recognize that for ourselves. Can a conversation happen here or no? And when the answer is no, the big thing we want to do for ourselves is stick to our values and live as we want to live, regardless of how the other person is acting. We want to be able to stay true to ourselves, and that's different for everybody because we all have our own value sets. But the how we act says everything about us, and it says actually fairly little about the other person. If
Okay.
anybody is walking around and they just happen to see the scenario and the situation, and they see our actions, and they don't know what the other person did to elicit those actions, they're going to make those judgments about us. How we are holding ourselves is a big part of who we are. So it's important to, one, stay safe. We need to protect ourselves in a situation like that. My first concern would be your safety. All right, how violent are they going to get? So you want to make sure
Mm.
that if violence were to occur, there's peacekeepers who may be at that event that can help prevent that. There may be police officers there that can help prevent that. The safety of yourself and everybody else is the main priority, and it's getting away from them, or getting some distance from them to be able to uh, have a good sense of safety. That's number one. But two, if
Thank you.
there is safety, then
I have
the
this
Mhm.
7-foot walking stick, and it can do some damage if need be. I haven't had to use it that way, but there have been times when I do hold it in a certain way that people back off. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm happy you have that stick. I'm even happier that you have not had to use it. Uh, but it's holding it that where sometimes we do need to be in a posture of preparation if anything were to happen. But a big thing is keeping true to your values, and you're using respectful speech that you find is appropriate for that situation and that person, where you can stay true to your values, true to who you are, and allow them to show who they are. Because people, when they're looking around, they see us interacting with the other person, they see our actions, they see the other person's actions. We want them to see who we are and who that other person is. Thank you.
All right, I have another hand up that I'm gonna unmute. It says Chase. I don't know if that's your name or.
That is my name. Um, what I what do you do when someone is being quite reasonable, but they're obviously coming from a place where they have maybe somewhere between 65 and 85% of the facts.
Mhm. If it is a hmm, So if it's purely just misinformation and they just don't have enough facts in it, but they are being peaceful about it and open to conversation, I generally will, that's a big part time when I will go into the what emotions are they feeling? coming out with those emotions, understanding where they came up with their ideas, where did they get those 65 to 85% of the facts? Because where they get their information is going to be important for us to know where we could possibly lead them to. If they got that information from like Fox News, then going to a news source that is more towards the left is probably not going to be something they're open and willing to do and give weight to. But going to something that's less to the right, more or in like the middle around there, that might be more helpful and more of a realistic approach for us to use with them. Or uh, myself personally, I like to tell anecdotes and stories for people, because if there's a story that can elicit emotion for a person, then if I just give them facts or figures, so I like to use anecdotes, and then also like to just point to some non-partisan areas like government websites, or things like that, instead of news outlets that people have ideas already in their heads of partisanship there. But when they are being peaceful and it's just misinformation, I find those are where we can usually have more of a conversation, because their calmness will allow for it. And if we listen to them, they're more likely to listen to us.
Thanks, Kevin. Interesting. Let's see. There are a couple things in the chat that are more comments, but I think you'll have, comments yourself on them. So I won't say people's names in case they don't want that, but here's a good one. Delivery is also a part of communication and conveying ideas in a respectful manner. I say this because, Kevin, your tone in speaking is very calming, welcoming, and reflective. It makes it easy to listen to. And I just want to quickly add onto that. I don't know if you've studied Chris Foss's work or anyone else here who's the FBI hostage negotiator, who's a very interesting guy. And one thing he calls it the late night DJ voice. That's kind of he really wants to be calming. So I think of that sometimes when I feel myself, because that is does not come naturally to me. But Kevin, what do you want to say more about delivery and that sort of thing?
Yeah, how we hold ourselves is so important, and how we are delivering that message. A good way I like to think about it is, where's our energy at? I recently had a client of mine tell me that sometimes if they are going um, on like a rant and taking up a lot of time, but then I have something specific I want to work on, they can start to feel my anxiety go up a little bit of I need to race to, because I want to give them that space, and then I have shorter time to talk about something. So I talk faster, and they go, and then I get a little anxious and I can feel that increase in speed. So I have to work on that, like my delivery sometimes too, of to keep it nice and calm and pleasant, because that's going to put somebody at ease. Another thing that haven't been able to find a ton of research on, because this is super specific, so hard to look up specifically, but I have seen things about in the past, is when we're eating meals, that generally calms people. So that over meals can be a really good time to have some of these conversations, especially if it's somebody who's going to be open and like they're calm and they just don't have all the information. They'll be more likely to sit and consider things if they're eating, sharing a meal with you, or even sharing a coffee with you. There's a friendliness to that. And our body posture. So we want to keep like open body posture. Um, but we don't want it to be like towering over the other person. If you're taller than the other person, I recommend sitting down. Sometimes even smaller. It's nice to just kind of sit down, and makes us less opposing to a person, but we don't want to be like hunched into ourselves, and looking like we're not confident in what we're sharing and saying. So we still want to have an open body posture, but want to make sure it's not threatening. Sometimes something I learned in de-escalation training is, instead of being if somebody's getting aggressive, and this kind of goes to like what George was asking about too, somebody's being really aggressive, sometimes moving ourselves so we're not directly facing them, that is less threatening to people. So that can be helpful in starting to diffuse. That's a simple body language thing we can do to help diffuse the situation, just being off diagonally to them instead of directly facing them. It feels a little bit less threatening for people.
Oh, that's fascinating. Actually, it reminds me of something that I was taught years ago in a Magic of Conflict seminar thing, is that you want to try to work on a problem. You said some of this earlier. You want to have a problem you're working on together instead of banging heads. And one thing she had us try out was talking like this and then standing next to each other and talking. And it felt a little awkward, but it also, I could, there was a difference. And so that diagonal seems like a good compromise. But interesting. Okay, we have others. Oh, it's not letting me. Okay, here we go. Becky, can you? Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot about this in my life, and one thing I've been aware of, especially in my experience and in my generation, is that girls and women have been given different messages about anger and about expressing strong feelings, even if it's not, overt anger. Just even standing up for themselves has been very difficult. And I think often these discussions don't address the sort of some of the gender differences, and there might be other differences too. And the messages that kids get when they're growing up that they can't feel this way, they can't express this, and I had one friend that even thought Mr. Rogers was a problem because he wanted everybody to be so good and soft-spoken and happy, and that sometimes kids just need to be mad. And that, I think that's okay. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I like to tell people our emotions are not bad. Emotions are good. We're supposed to have emotions. We're supposed to feel them. And they tell us, like, feeling, being mad, that helps us recognize that there's a problem that we want addressed. It's our actions that can be good or bad. So we want to be thinking about, what are we doing about being mad? And is that action and response from us in um, relation to and at the same level as what's making us mad. This I want to again go back to Katsuhaga. He had a really good description of that in his talk of the if breaking it, we could see breaking down a door as being to bust into somebody's house uninvited as being very over the top and inappropriate. But if that house was on fire and it was a firefighter, that's very much in response to what was actually happening there. So it is appropriate in that situation. And he goes through some others too, of like the Black Lives Matter, protesting, like shutting down highways and streets, highways. That was seen as very big action, but it was in response to a very big violence that was happening to that community. So it was in in relation, in response, and proportionate to what it is. So we want when we're feeling mad, our action should be proportionate to what is making us mad, and proportionate to that situation. Maybe it is something big, like racism, that is making us mad, but in this conversation, that isn't the right proportion we're supposed to bring to it, for this conversation with this person. It's they're 85% there, and and they're being calm and kind. Us bringing the same anger that is in proportionate to systemic racism in this country is not going to be appropriate, right?
Great. Can I try to tie that back to something you said, and then I'll get to Ken.
Absolutely.
Earlier you mentioned that it's not respectful if we don't share our view. And I found that really interesting, and I read a little about that in the dignity model that Donna Hicks put forward. And yeah, the idea that certainly sharing is appropriate and wanted, and but then there's just this reality that when you yell at someone, their brain, what part of their brain is activated changes, and that they just cannot listen the same way. So even though there are times it feels like it would be very appropriate for me to scream at someone, I also realize that it doesn't do any good. And in the end doesn't make me feel better. Is that part of what is that?
Yeah, that's exactly came from the dignity model. That idea, and a very important thing I do want to comment on with the dignity model too is dignity. We're giving them the dignity that they can possibly handle this. This means there's a chance they're not able to handle our truth and they respond inappropriately. It's like called the dignity of risk. There's risk there that they aren't going to be able to do this, but we're going to give them the dignity that we're going to let them try. We're going to allow them the opportunity to possibly handle our truth and what we have to say. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, my clicker stopped working. Oh yeah, Ken's up. Yeah.
Yes, I was just going to say, I read somewhere where a human being, if they were to yell at the top of your lungs, you can only sustain that for about 1 minute. So I tested this. I went for a hike into the woods and I yelled out every curse word, every epithet known to man at the top of my lungs. And lo and behold, after about 60 seconds, I was totally exhausted. And I took my pulse rate and my blood pressure, and they were all elevated. So the moral of that is, even if I let the other guy, or not guy, but anyone, talk, there still has to be some feedback from that person to let their frustrations and their anger out. Now, of course, safety is tantamount. That's the most important thing in peace, in my estimation. But I just wanted to kind of give that as an illustration of no one can sustain anger at that level for that long. So part of it is trying to get the situation to diffuse, to, try to find a common ground. And I wanted just to say that and maybe get your impression on that.
Yeah, kind of something that I've learned makes me unique as a therapist is that if somebody's yelling at me, I just allow them to. Well, they can yell to me. If it's yelling at me and it being inappropriate at me, I will usually have some boundaries that I'll hold with them that need to be respectful. But if they're yelling, then they're allowed to yell. There's a lot going on, and yelling is cathartic and can release a lot. So I think sometimes allowing yelling can be a very good emotional release, and usually then good conversations can happen. Once they're able to release that emotion, good conversations can happen. But it's important for us, if we're going to allow somebody to yell at us, that we cannot take it personally, that we can handle it and separate that from ourselves of like, they're yelling at me, but I'm not harmed by that yelling. I want to go back to George and her situation, their situation of the Proud Boys. If they were yelling, that's maybe a different situation where, okay, again, like I was saying, comes into a safety concern, and you got to make sure safety's there. But if we know safety is there, and we're being yelled at, if we can handle that, then great. If we can't, that's when it's, hey, I need to take space away from this conversation right now, and I need to tend to myself and heal myself before I can come back to this.
Great. Heather.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm curious how you would think the role of trauma is playing in everything happening in our culture and politics. And then one piece of that, I read a study that said that people who have been abused are often more likely to prefer an authoritarian type government. a certain segment of people who have been abused. But then for me, like I have a family of intergenerational trauma, and a lot of times when I listen to the news and the way people talk to each other and the cruelty, like I feel re-traumatized over and over again. And I've had so many conversations with people where I've tried to connect, and I've brought this up in other meetings, like I've tried to be compassionate, but I'm not met with any connection. No one listens to my perspective, and then I become quiet. So I'm curious, I know that's like a double question, but what you think about all that.
Yeah, so that's a perspective I never thought about until June when I saw Katsuhaga's speech here, and he speaks to that the our society and action, like what we're seeing in our society, linking it to intergenerational trauma of this country. This country was born on violence, and we are still in trauma, and we are never healed from it. So still experiencing that, and that blew my mind. I had my wife listen to it this weekend actually, and it blew her mind. She's also a therapist, and she's like, "That's absolutely amazing! Like such a interesting way of seeing this all, and so as a trauma therapist, so accurate. And there's nothing I've been able to do to poke holes in that perspective. It seems like very valid. This our society as a whole is very wounded, and that's why a big reason I find compassion to be and very key. Obviously, it's not the only thing to difficult conversations, but I think it's one of the most important parts, and that's why in a 30 to 60 minutes, felt that was the most important thing to focus on today, because that's an important part to healing trauma.
We are getting very close to the end, but Kathy, I'm going to let you go ahead and unmute, and hopefully you can be quick.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Mine is pretty quick, I think. Occam's razor, you said when faced with multiple explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation is usually the best one. And I wanted to kind of shed some light on that because that particular thing, the way I'm thinking of it is a lot of times disagreement happens because of black and white thinking and not considering the nuances. And so for me, I'm hearing that, I'm going, well, it's not simple, it's nuanced, but I think you're meaning it differently. So I wanted to know if you could address that.
Yes, so it is very nuanced, and nuance that can be sometimes a simple explanation is, hey, there's nuances, like certain things are different. But here with this razor, a lot of what it's talking about is that complexity is, this mostly comes up in conspiracy theories. They tend to get extremely complex to prove their point. So when we're arguing with like certain things like that, at certain points like that, that's where it tends to be most important to be. Let's come to simple explanations. The government positions are often very enticing to people who want power, and people who want power don't always want the good of all. That doesn't mean that all politicians are bad. There's nuance to that. There are very amazing a lot of amazing politicians out there who are for the people, and they're doing the good fight to really protect others and be the voice for others. But there are very likely politicians out there who are not, and they are um, very tied to lobbyists. And doing that, we know that through history to be true as well. So the nuance is there's both good and bad there. The simple explanation is this can attract that can like attract people who are looking for power. That can also recognize that doesn't mean everybody is there. It would be very complex, like to say everybody there is out for power and nobody's out for the good of others and things like that. Like to make that a point would be very complex. But when we can see the nuance of it, and it's not black and white, there's more nuance, that's often a simple explanation or simpler.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And I'm gonna wrap us up here, but I think says, what did you read with your wife about the trauma of the nation? Was that the Kazuhaga book?
That was his his talk at the Monday Night Series back in June that I put the link to. That's where I first heard it, and then now reading his book, I'm seeing it more. And there's one other place that I'm blanking on now that I did see it since then, but that was with me actually researching it because he was the first person I heard share that idea.
Maybe you want to put it in the chat again because people who came after you did that won't see it.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, great. So thank you, Kevin. I have a few things to say to wrap up here. First, just real quick, this series is free. It is open to everyone. That said, your donations help us keep going, and we really appreciate them. I also want to mention that most of New Hampshire Peace Action's past Monday night programs are available on YouTube. I'm going to put that link in there too. So that includes the Kazu Haga talk, but there are others. And we really want you to stay connected to us. Here's both a link to our page and also to that campaign nonviolence page. You can stay in touch with us, nhpeaceaction.org, to learn about what we're working on and what events we're planning. And here's just a taste of that. Our next Ceasefire Now vigils will be Wednesday, September 24th, 2 p.m. at Representative Pappas's Dover office, Thursday, September 25, noon to 1 at City Plaza Concord, and Wednesday, October 1st, 2 to 3 at Senator Shaheen's Dover office. We really hope to see you at a very special event on Sunday, October 5, 1:30 p.m. We gather for the New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund annual event at the Derryfield Restaurant in Manchester, New Hampshire. We'll be having a meal. There'll be awards for local activists and a speaker. We are having Dr. Mazen Kumsia join us by Zoom from the West Bank to talk about Eco-Samud, ecocide and resistance in Palestine. Our next Peace and Justice conversation via Zoom will be Monday, October 6th, 7 p.m. This one will address dismantling colonialism and militarism with Sarah Augustine, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. And I'll just do one more. This is in person on Saturday, October 11th, 1 to 5:30 p.m. They'll be in Stratham, New Hampshire. We're having a Work That Reconnects workshop. This is based on Joanna Macy's work to support and re-energize people who are working to create change in the world. We recognize that people could probably use that. So all of that is on our website. You can find out more there. And I really want to thank Kevin for doing this. Obviously, this is a rich topic we could have talked a lot more about, but it's good to wade in and get started. And maybe some of you will have other people in your life that you can talk about it with and think it through. Let's see. I think that is it. So yeah, Kevin, everyone help me thank Kevin. Yay. And many thanks to all of you. We really appreciate you spending your, well, for us, evening with us, and we hope to see you next time.